All right. Also, if there's questions between that you want to ask among each other, please go ahead. Else I will start to collect. Okay, Kojo asked if I wanted to say a few words more about the pathos of the Anthropocene. It's not something I can only speculate wildly about it, and partly because it was so strong, the impression of that amazing character that spoke to your images of where her entire body becomes the medium of Earth, and of course that is highly like if there is sort of a romantic version of that, yeah, like the romantic version would be, let's say, okay, it's maybe not exhausting. I don't want to be sounding tendentious here, but like the romantic version of that becoming medium of Earth is more like the Starhawk version of neo-pagan witchcraft, you know, like reconnecting with the bodily Earth. But here, I think we have a rather interesting twist to that can do quite well without invoking pagan divinities, right? And the interesting thing of, you know, historically it's really like that this image that we've been talking about today set in motion an entire wave of a neo-spiritualization which ruined, in my eyes, much of the political questions or displaced them. So this is a highly difficult territory to talk about, but it's also one that needs to be cracked open, because just discarding the mediumistic has never helped in undoing it, which is one of the general lessons, I guess, of media philosophy. If you sort of the mediumistic conditions, a simple formula of that would mean that there is a sort of adaptation process by which one becomes an entitled spokesperson, no? For any agency, whether that is on behalf, whether that is a representative in a democratic process that is to speak for a collective, or whether that is a scientist that is to speak for agencies of, such as particles in the CERN reactor or something like that. So it's just a field of study. I think that one cannot avoid after this immanentization immersion turn in which everything is coded in information ecologies and feedback effects, and the mind switches permanently between being wholly externalized and wholly internalized, but one doesn't really know how to politicize the tilting moments. But in order to trace them, I think we have to study how one becomes a medium, and this is not only in terms of spokespeople, where it's very easily observable, I think, but it's also something that relates to everyday life. No? You step from one systemically scripted space into another, and it's always interpolating and authoring, calling some mediumistic behavior into being.
Yeah. I wanted to add the problem of these languages that are involved here. I mean, first of all, I wanted to make this point again about how in a world that is let's say computer assisted, or not even assisted, but which is drawn by computers and data from computers, and where people are speaking about that, with what language they are speaking about that, and we have had this remark on the PowerPoint, which is of course ridiculous, because the PowerPoint is I mean, we can't feel that the PowerPoint could be the language and that we can communicate that kind of a world that has engendered so many levels of machines. And I mean, the problem in that institution that is not anymore an institution as we imagine, but which is a huge machine, right? Even the people in the institution speak like robots, more or less, we can say. I mean, it seems to be like one was really speaking like a robot, but I mean, these robots, if you want to say, consider them, I mean, considering that we are all somehow more half human, half machine in that sense, right? But the language which is used there is, and I think I would like to take back one of these ideas of heterogeneous machinique from Guattari. This is like, it's another type of language, which he called point ligne, no? It's this moment of point line. He says this is a different type of it's not a language based on words and letters, and it's a point line language, much more close to what you were tracing in the interview, and with this report on the vibration. This is a point line connection to some kind of a phenomenon. In that sense, point line, of course, is very, very similar also to making experimentations of thinking within our physical conditions. But this point line languages are not taken into serious consideration from the perspective of these machines. That means one of the real ecological problems is the disequilibrium. And that is one of the phrases that Guattari also meant in heterogeneous machinique. The ecological problem is there's a problem of disequilibrium, like the guy who was saying, okay, at some point we can just skip. But we have to understand that the disequilibrium might not be the one to, at some point, the Earth that has produced so much, I don't know what the atmosphere that is changing, but is also disequilibrium in terms of these machines that are related to decide certain ideas in terms of what it means to create more autopoiesis, meaning systems that are actually life systems and that can generate their own conditions of living. So I think these 2 points, I find it very clearly addressed to the necessity to understand the extreme fragility of producing solutions to that ecological problem. That is a long history of the problem of power, that the scientific narratives and the scientific institutions and the political scientific institutions do not want to account in terms of the development of aesthetical paradigms and different types of languages and so on. And first of all, they do not want to give any existential territory to the development of such very important researches in terms of point sign languages.
I just want to talk about something. I want to talk about Kapari or point line. Maybe it is connected. I just wanted to actually talk about this idea of going inward, dolphins and all of that. I mean, I might sound completely crazy, but I really don't care. This idea of going inward, the meditation inward, the flotation tank thing. I mean, I find it quite interesting to see your presentation, all the links you've made with the dolphin guy, John Lilly, and the artist. It was very interesting to see this artist actually try to create an image from the internal experience. I find it quite cold the way it's being described, because, I mean, this is an experience of meditation, of seeing inner light. I don't know if many people have had the chance to experience samadhi, but it's quite good. But what is very interesting is the absolute unrepresentability of that experience as an image, because that experience is it's not something you see with your eyes; it's something you see inside. But it's also that experience, those images that he's creating are, if I can say, when you have that experience, it's all of time, all of history, all of love, all of everything is in that. So it's quite incredible that it's actually impossible to represent that. And I think it is like extraordinary that at the time that the humans went to the moon, there is this kind of burst all over the world of all these people doing mass meditations and meditating all over the place. I mean, I grew up in such a kind of mass gatherings of humans meditating, but I think it's just incredibly interesting to kind of, it's the first time I think I've seen that experience being, you know, someone attempting to put an image to it.
We do have now, I think, really several not quite cosmically harmonious layers opened up here, but that's I think this is a construction site that I think is actually quite unavoidable as well, like the incommensurability that nevertheless calls for sort of traversing these different registers and these are also narratives, no, or planes of narratives. Anyway, Erich, you wanted to comment on some of this?
Or maybe we should have...
We do have a question right after you then. Yeah? Okay, so you...
the human being the representative of something that cannot speak in a human language. And this is a very classic concept in religion and in mysticism, which is really nice that you, I don't know your name, I'm sorry, I wasn't here all day, but that you brought this around again. But the concept of the homunculus as the human body, as the representative map on which we place other scales of being or other agents, and the inside being, the inside of the human brain being a map for the external cosmos. This is also a really classic mystic concept. How do you think anyone who feels qualified to answer this question, how do you think that we can take this concept and take this pathos and use it in our political discussion about the complexity and the unification of our collective interest as a human species and as a quote-unquote Gaia, which is again this personal experience of the mass. So in our politics and in these like large organizations and anyway.
I want to say that's quite a big question, but I don't think it's mysticism. I think it's very kind of scientific.
Mysticism is one of the levels on which we can describe this sort of thing. So the imagery resonates throughout many different conversations and narratives.
I'm sorry. I'm not sure if I can answer the whole question. But I'm interested in the Anthropocene hypothesis. I was particularly interested to see what sort of notions of changing our human thinking were part of this hypothesis. And it's interesting to see, I mean, this is a scientific paper published in a scientific journal, but it gives you a sense, it wants to give you a sense of the history of where the Anthropocene has come from. So it lines up also some historical concepts to think about that came before the Anthropocene, and it names one thing, the noosphere, so the sphere of thinking around the Earth that is also a sort of prominent trope in thinking about the Anthropocene. And it also seems to suggest, at least in some of the writings of the Anthropocene, that fundamentally it's about changing our way of thinking. And this is where it gets a bit tricky for me when also, for example, cognitive scientists say that the Anthropocene is important for them because they can contribute by changing our thinking on a sort of brain level to accommodate to a sort of planetary consciousness. I think this is a very problematic merging of horizons that I would be very careful with.
I just want to say that I'm really skeptical what concerns this notion of the Anthropocene. I have the impression, I mean, I'm not alone with this. This is a big discussion, I guess at least. You know more about this probably. But it's a or the high stage of any anthropocentric notion I've ever heard, I have to say. And with this, and therefore it is a difficult notion because therefore it is so exploitable in a way. And that's the discussion, I think. If this is a notion which can be exploited by industry to run even the ecological turn we have to make, and to exploit this turn. And the concept of the Anthropocene works pretty good in this machine because it is so anthropocentric. It says not only we caused all the problems, but we are in power, so we can even manage to avoid the last stage, and so on and so on. I just want to say this, that we should not discuss or bring in the notion just as a coin going from hand to hand, and we have to look if it's what is the word for Falschgeld? Fausse monnaie? Huh? Okay, counterfeit cash. Yeah, maybe it's that's yeah.
Well, if I may comment on this, I mean, I share this completely. It's others would claim that it's both anthropocentrism and decentering. Granted, certainly, I think also with regards to mysticism of all kind, I'd be highly careful if one doesn't have really good reason to go into this territory. It's better not to, I think, personally. But it's unavoidable at certain points. And then I think one needs to look quite carefully at pathos in order to understand what are symptoms. You know, gesture is also interesting partly because it tells us something about there's a partial holism in gesture, because gesture somehow always adds that which is not positive to the diagram. You know, like think of the famous photographs of the hysterics in the Charcot Theatre in Paris. It is basically the pathos of the gesture that can tell you about the relational diagram that is set up there. The Anthropocene, the sort of the evil part of that in my little terminology, I would call it is a clinical neopositivism. And you can find that in the talk of this PowerPoint Institute. But you know, they are not evil, these people, by definition. So one really has to find a different language for the kind of spaces and networks they create. I believe very much in this. Now, just quickly to finish this. It's a clinical neopositivism that serves on the blue marble effect in the sense that it does really not know an outside anymore. It does not know what it lacks. It does not know otherness anymore. This is really a symptom of a kind of, can you follow this intuition of, it does not know anymore by definition that its reductions are reductions. Let alone has a language for what may be outside of these reductions, and which one, and therefore it's so important also for, like working on an exhibition on this stuff. It was really important for me to have a perspective like Diederich's, like a more classical ideology critique one, because it has a language of a kind of, it knows how to deal with symptoms, right, and with attitudes and with gestures, and it takes them almost too serious. But that's extremely important, because else you are in fact in a reductionist technocrats discourse that is serving the world government of Siemens Corporation in the future, the green world management of a geoengineered planet. But it's also really a symptom of our times, I believe, that it's this part of this open-ended question of the disappearance of the outside, that the kind of forms of knowledge about that which is lacking there are no stable basis, there's no stable language for addressing these, let alone, like even those disciplines, let's say, that were once called into being, like therapy or so, they have become part of this neo-positivist dispositif, through the needle, the ear of the needle, the eye of the needle of California. That's sort of what I would have to add about this. Last question.
This was a lovely day. I learned a great deal. I found a great deal in what you said to be recognizable. And probably everybody in this room who's over 40, which is probably not many, recalls that moment in which the blue marble arrived as the figure of something already dreamt, a kind of radical alienation and exteriorization. But one that doesn't go as far, I would suggest, as eliminating the possibility of that absolute alterity, that absolute outside, which is death. So, I mean, to invoke the notion of a consciousness that has no outside is to invoke the notion of a consciousness without death. And I mean, I don't know how seriously you wish to introduce that as the thought of this moment, but I think there'd be very good reason to do so, insofar as we have all taught ourselves to overcome the real trauma of the mushroom, which was the thought that we would vanish in such a way that we could not be narrated, not remembered, that there would be no survivor. I mean, this is the real trauma of the nuclear moment. But I wanted to ask you a question that maybe takes off from this. It's a question of temporality, because it seems to me that in all of the conversations today, there has been a tension between, on the one hand, one of the, shall we call it, the after effects of the nuclear, which is the loss of eventfulness. The problem with the nuclear is it is characterized by the logic of the half-life. We don't know what will have happened after a nuclear explosion. It will go on and on and on. Our armaments continue to detonate on and on and on. So we have on the one hand this loss of the possibility of writing the catastrophe as event and as that which is historicizable. And on the other hand, we have again and again the kind of specter, the libidinously invested specter of the catastrophe of absolute event coming back as, you know, climate change irrevocably turning into unlivability and so forth. So I wondered if for you this contradiction between, on the one hand, the loss of a kind of eventfulness or the fear that one doesn't know what will be happening or what are the consequences of what is going on now, and the narration of constant catastrophe, of absolute eventfulness. If this is a helpful thing to introduce into the conversation of what has been thus far, primarily cast in the register of the scopic, of that which is spatialized, of that the epistemic as spatializable, So I would ask you about that, the question of the temporal in the context of what we've heard today.
Maybe briefly about the death question, partly of the most interesting writing about the arrival and the transformations of psychoanalysis in California are around the kind of the entire case of California, to use a wording by Lawrence Rickles, as being a sort of death cult in a sort of mimicry to death in order to overcome it, right? This is a kind of known, like sort of the California cult of life as actually being a mummy death cult. I'm not going into details, but it's beautiful to test this. I think it has a relation to the global visibility that Diederich was talking about. This whole world is watching hyper visibility. But that's also just speculation. Who wants to answer the second part of the question?
Yeah, I think I really like your invocation of the temporality of the future anterior. This tense in which you articulate the tense in which we don't know what will have happened. This future that folds back on itself into its anteriority. I think this is an absolutely fundamental dimension that you draw attention to, and I think it's extremely important. I would then go on to say that that I think there's been a shift in our understanding of the nuclear, which is continually oscillating between the nuclear threat as a question of weaponry, as a Cold War question, and then secondly the question of nuclear power and the promise and the threat of nuclear power, and then thirdly the question of nuclear waste, as this nuclear waste which brings dimensions of several 100,000 years, and the questions of storing waste, and the kind of the design questions of calculating, the semiotic questions of designing for these long-term futures. And I think all of these are questions of futurity, the nuclear bomb, nuclear power, and nuclear waste. And I think you signal the way the future anteriority is a tense that becomes increasingly important in the Cold War era. And I guess that tomorrow we'll begin to articulate those points that you raise now in relation to these points today. I think these discourses are crucial, but they've been held somehow apart. The discourse of the blue marble and the let's say the inverted astronomy of the blue marble. The kind of inverted astronomy of the blue marble, the inverse look, the look back at the Earth from the moon, and the euphoria that comes through, as if this euphoria could somehow heal the trauma of the future anterior. I think they're absolutely related in the way you point out, but I think this is the hinge between today and tomorrow that we're beginning to articulate.
That was a beautiful closing note. I want to thank everybody on and off stage very much for joining and sharing your thoughts with us. And all good evening. You're making an announcement?
Thank you so much, all of you on stage and indeed here. There should still, maybe there is some wine left in the glass pavilion, so give it a try. I hope it's still there. There is a show made by students and we had some wine there for all who stayed till the end, so I hope it's still there. Thank you.